Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris. Hope you are well. This webinar will start in about 2-3 minutes. Good afternoon, Ali. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. Shall we do a quick text tech check? You should see the captions. Do you see them?
Show captions. Yes, I see them.
Great. Recording works as well. And let me share the slides.
Lovely. You are recording it?
It shows recording on my screen, yes.
Okay, super.
Have a problem with the slides here. There it is. Do you see them?
Yes.
And do you still see my little picture, that video as well?
Yes. Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's kick it off.
Fair
Hello,
enough.
everyone. People are joining, yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Ellie, the Thought Leadership Specialist at NZN. Thank you for joining today's webinar on NGO digital transformation. Today, we'll be looking at which digital technologies provide realistic value, are scalable, and can improve efficiency across your organization. I welcome our today's host, Chris. He is the Managing Director at NZN. Before I hand it over, I will just make a quick note to you all that the recordings will be shared after the webinar. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A function and we'll get to those at the end. Okay, great. Over to you, Chris.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ali. This is a quick conversation, a coffee format-based conversation about digitalization. By now, most of you know us, I assume. Thank you very much for being here all together again. My name is Chris, as Ali said, and together with my colleagues, I've been sort of managing and kicking off digital transformations in NGOs for the last 10-15 years. And of course, that is massively changing again. Today, we're talking about why it matters, what matters, how do you go about it? So how do you digitalize? What does it mean, using an example from a funding, supply chain operations, and hopefully leaving you inspired with 5 practical steps about how to go about it. Unlike our big full-on hour and a bit webinars, this one is a short one. So this is sort of an inspiration-based slide design here. The presentation isn't supposed to take more than 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes maximum, then I'll shut up. And we go into the Q&A if there are any. So this should fit neatly into your lunch hour. That's the design of these smaller webinars. The one thing you may want to look out for is the large funding update on the 19th of April, so in less than a month now, where we have the donors and the fundraising trends updates for the summer of 2023. That is a much bigger webinar of an hour and a bit. You can sign up for that through our website now. Is that correct, Ali? That's open for registration now, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. I can actually share the link in this chat as well, so you can get it directly.
So that's the next big one. Today, we're talking about digitalization, and all of you have probably signed up to know what's it all about. So let's get started. First of all, why does this actually matter? Digitalization, let's have a look in a minute what it means, but first of all, why it's important. Very simple, it has a major benefits. We can actually shift power and localize far more using more digital ways of delivering our services to users, not just about doing things. I'll get back to that later. We can obviously collaborate better by changing how we work. And interestingly enough, lots and lots of research from the COVID years have now said that the fundraising efforts through digital engagement, not just sharing of stories, caused far more empathy with donors and fundraisers than previously thought. So we take a quick look later at that, and that is obviously all on a digital backbone. Crucially, in this day and age, employee proposition is majorly backed up by a digital work platform, allowing your colleagues and your employees to work anytime, anywhere, and do it in their way, is a major part of the employment proposition that reduces turnover and makes sure that the most talented people rise up through the organization. And then finally, as we go about scaling and growing and responding to this disrupted world, speed is a major issue. The more you digitalize, the less you have to do in person, the less you have to do in bricks and mortar. And we have now seen NGOs that have majorly reduced new office setups times and put them, saved 2/3 of the time. There used to be 2 years before a new country office was created. They're now doing it in 5 months because critical back office functions just don't need to be set up locally anymore. So we take a quick look at that, but those are the major reasons why we worry or why we talk about the digitalization. Let's level a little bit. You may feel that this feels a little bit familiar here, but if this is what our partners, about 300 of them globally at any point in time, sort of tell us. And they keep telling me and saying, look, one of the problems I have with my daily work is that information is scattered across the organization, with different people on different information platforms. I can't find anything on MS Teams. I need to ask 5 people just to establish what is what. Never mind getting a comprehensive update. Decision-making is fragmented as well. Often by a perceived or believed consensus is necessary. This person has something to say, that person something to say, then we need to wait for that. And all that lengthens and frankly, lengthen the time needed to get a decision done. And it is energy draining. Staff repeatedly tells me that they're getting frustrated with a slow process and they frankly lose motivation. And they feel less empowered to actually make progress. And some stuff gets isolated very, very harshly. So if people do not work in the mainstream of the organization, not with the right connection, if they happen to join new, some people never really make an impact in the organization, they get disconnected from the purpose and the main strategic goals of the NGO, and unsurprisingly, within 2 or 4 years' time, they leave. And lastly, our clients report back to us, at least initially, before we start working with them, significant bottlenecks. Key processes hang with 1, 2, or a small number of people or a small number of systems that are literally bottlenecks, and the organization sort of freezes up. So if this sounds familiar, I'm not saying that everything of that can be solved with digital, but the more digital and the better we have our processes, the more we can solve these problems. And I think acknowledging them is the first major step. So here's a thought. Research from the University of Harvard, Accenture, and bias as well, frankly, in 2019, 2020 has sort of confirmed that what we call that NGOs have an island mentality. The island mentality sometimes being that we need to do everything by us. And I've put here on this overly complicated slide a simple, straightforward business development and program development and launch process. This is quite typical of where what a standard project and program development process looks like. You identify an opportunity, you assess the need, you build a proposal, you contract, and eventually you launch a new project or program. So far, so good. But of course, there's lots and lots of people involved within your organization and externally. You may have advisors who identify opportunities. The donor may have a thing or two to say about that as well, of course. Your program staff may want a slightly different kind of program. Your business development team may just look at the opportunity. And there's a consortia involved. After this, you can see 5 more other organizations who may design the program with you. All that is coordinated by your BD team, but your program team wants to change or add milestones. You have external subject specialists. You may have finance specialists. You have your value for money advisors. You have your donor inception team that is responsible to contract and launch a program, and they have a slightly different perspective from the donor design team. You have your organizational finance specialists. You have your leadership team who want to make sure your program is in line with the organizational strategy for the next 5 years. And then we are not even at the project launch here. None of this is, and there's probably 5 more individuals and organizations that get involved in the conception, in the design, in the proposal design, in the project launch, and into the program management later of a program. Now, the fundamental thing to take away from this workflow, which just looks at it just looks at program design right now, not even program management, is ask yourself, is DIY really possible here? Is it really realistic to expect one organization or even a small team within your organization to do all that? And if anybody has any sort of realistic expectation, then the answer has to be no. There has this island mentality that we need to do everything by ourselves isn't helping this process. And if we want to collaborate more, as we always profess we do, and if we want to streamline this process, there is no way around digitalizing and streaming it, because we can only work together with people if it's on a single platform, if we have shared information, if everybody knows exactly what their expectations are. So that's an internal reason why we may want to do a change of mindset here. And there's an external one as well. We all know that collaborative working drives more reach, more scale. We can actually increase funding by working more together, by improving services delivery, but we can only do so if everybody has specific tasks and objectives. We also know that the more global and the more fragmented the organization becomes, information needs to be more centralized, and access to this information needs to be democratized across the organization. In an ideal form, everybody in the organization has permanent access to every essential non-confidential piece of data. Of course, there are some confidentiality rules like HR that require that to be restricted, but 90% of the information should be available to everybody in the organization, so that when you design a program, everybody can access the information in a single place and not have to ask 5 different people on 5 different servers on 3 different places. Lastly, we all agree, at least we profess to agree, that analysis and learning is absolutely key. The more that we know, the better our impact. But again, that requires information to be centralized and to be systematically analyzed in some sort of workflow. You cannot replicate that at HQ or just in a single person. There needs to be a process behind it. All that, so far, hopefully, so good. Maybe you agree. What is necessary from this slide, what I'd look like to lobby for you to take away, is a change in perspective. The problem is that when we talk about digital transformations in nonprofit organizations, they often start with trying to improve an internal process. Like, we need to do what we do right now better, faster, more collaboratively. I would like to challenge that a little bit and suggest an external perspective by asking, what can a digital platform, what can digital working methods do for us directly in our mission? In other words, not just streamline and do what we always do, better, faster, more digital, less paper, more screen, but how can we actually scale it in terms of impact? And here are some ideas. Ask different questions. Here's some ideas that we started digital processes with before we launched into fixing them. For example, one of the NGOs, we asked, how can we communicate with people we work with over the horizon, as they called it, across internationally en masse? How do we talk to not just 15 or 20 or 200 beneficiaries or users, as I like to call them, of our services as part of our M&E and our project design and our needs assessment, but how do we do this? How can we communicate with 10,000 people in a short space of time? You can only do it digitally, and asking the question leads to a different program design. Second one, how can users receive support without being there in person? Can we reach people who need our help digitally? Can we do some of our services digitally, replace them with digital delivery means? How can we learn about what users are expecting? Again, at scale. How can we do a needs assessment in the hundreds of thousands? We cannot do this in the same way we've done it before. We cannot send consultants to the other side of the world and do surveys. There's a different kind of thinking necessary here. Or second question, how do we open up our daily activities to donors and supporters without manual reporting? Is there some way we can bring in our people who donated to us into the fold and show them on a weekly or daily level saying, this is what happened to your money today? What self-service tools should be or could we offer? Could users use some of our knowledge independently without us serving it on a platter? Next question, if we work with partner or in a consortia, could we integrate financial reporting without additional staff? Could they report what they're spending on a system that we all share, rather than having to do this by email and create a donor-compliant financial report from scratch? Incredibly time-consuming. I'm just going to go on. Can we support users in countries where we are not present? I think that's a very provoking question. Can we deliver services without having a country office there? And in some organizations that is not possible. It's very hard to do shelter in a country where you're not present. But for many services, particularly advocacy or rights-based programming, that is perfectly possible. And finally, how can we support and engage supporters beyond just reading our updates? Can we get their input? Can we make out of financial supporters, can we enrich them by becoming contributors? These questions change the perspective of digitalization from doing the same thing, just digital and better, to scaling it and asking another question about doing it very different. Answers to these questions, and they will be completely diverse amongst you, will basically drive a different set of answers that leads to a completely different transformation in your organization. And this is not exclusive, of course. This is just an inspiration. Here are a few examples of what some of our partner NGOs are currently thinking about and what are they doing. Chatbots integrated deep into their social media presence help drive an audience engagement by average of 65%. That is massive. And we're talking about engagement. Engagement has a direct correlation to funding, but also reach. So not just communicating one way via social media to our audience, these chatbots are able to actually correspond with and engage with our supporters. And very soon, as you all know from the news, in the matter of a few months, we will have them AI-powered, which means they can answer and engage much more complex questions. Imagine a chatbot integrated into either on your website or on a social media platform or a direct chat box, where you can answer an individual person who's considering spending not some money, but also some time on your mission, where that chat box can answer questions about your programming in some country, about the type of what you do. That is a degree of integration that is not a surprise, that drives engagement up. And it will not just drive engagement, it will drive funding and basically free labor. We've seen in another organization where a text message bot, so similar to a chat bot, supports a cash-based intervention on its targeting and help unbanked households manage budgets better. So not just did this organization, it was a large humanitarian organization, identify needs for cash distributions via a text messaging service, so not quite smartphones, but text message based, but also helped, once they have the money, they gave tips and received feedback via a bot again for managing that budget. And nice side effect, it enabled real-time reporting of the impact to the donor, which again drove a massive amount of donor engagement. It's a simple thing to do. It's not actually technically that difficult at all. We've had this technology for 5 years, but employing it in a different way. Some of you may know Zipline, an amazing organization that provides fully autonomous drone-based delivery of medical supplies. And what's really different about Zipline is that they've taken digital transformation to another level. They didn't become successful until their entire medical supply ordering process and dispatch of the Zipline, of the drone to supply a local hospital has been completely automated. They've actually been doing this for a number of years, but it wasn't until that automation, that digitalization, that they can now bring down the time of issuing a blood sample or any medical supply to the hospital from a day to 90 minutes. And that made a real difference in the field, and that helped reduce child mortality in these areas. So here's an organization that is a great example of solving a logistical problem with a complete end-to-end automation process. And finally, we have a organization we work with in the area of journalism and anti-radicalization. And they enabled on their website, through chatbots, through joint writing of articles, through citizen journalism engagement platforms across the border to hold local authorities in Yemen to account, powered by a map-based data set. I don't want to go too much into the detail. There could be a whole webinar on that alone. The point to take away here is that that is a really good example of end-to-end digitalization. I hope that inspires you a bit. And I'm going to finish by basically giving you sort of two ways of thinking. I'm not going to read them out, but if you are looking at, for example, funding or any area in your work that you would like to digitalize, think about the systems that you have right now that you need to transform, but by all means, think about the culture. Change your perspective to what you can do with this amazing technology we have right now, and shift your organizational culture from a sort of centralized approach to a more accountability and trust-based and transparent approach. That will change the way you work significantly, maybe more than you realize, and we all realize it now. But digitalization is not just about implementing a slightly better co-working space or MS Teams or a Google Business Suite. We're not just replacing the fax machine with the emails, after all. We are doing it fundamentally different. And to leave you with a sort of 5 concrete steps to kickstart your transformation, may I suggest this? First of all, please change your perspective. Know where and how we can not just increase how we do things, but increase the efficiency by looking at the past performance, success and failures, and then saying we can do this differently. We can actually implement our mission digitally. Then develop a digitalization plan. Many of our NGO partners do this with a sprint meeting. They decide on the tools, the timelines, and the human resource in the early phases, and they go ahead. Get buy-in, of course. Again, a sprint meeting could help here, creating real ownership and appointing so-called champions to drive certain parts of the digitalization. Finally, get started, of course, with a clear timeline, also knowing when this digitalization drive will fail or not progress, so that it doesn't just linger and become a frustrating affair. And very important, create a feedback loop. Very intentional. Implement a plan in phases and make sure that in between these phases or at the end of this phase, there is a time and a loop to assess and see how the last one went, so that we can reinforce and improve the next phase. There's no way, I can guarantee you, that your digitalization plan that spans maybe 18 months or 1 year will go according to plan. So we may as well do it in phases with a learning loop in between each one of them. Good. That's hopefully on time, Ali. I hopefully managed to stay within 20 minutes.
We did indeed, bang on time. Well done.
Good. As Ali said, or as I said, the final upcoming webinars, you can see the link there when Ali sends out the slides. The big funding briefing and donor update happens in just under a month's time, the 19th of April, which is going to be a very different format. Right now, let's see if there are any other questions.
Yes, so open the floor to any questions. You did cover quite a comprehensive list of questions that may have been on our mind.
Yes.
So they perhaps are all answered. There are no questions waiting
Perfect.
Which is great. You've done my job for me, Chris.
Easy peasy then. In which case, let's close this mini webinar if there are no major questions. Thank you very much for dialing in. Ellie will send out the slides later today, tomorrow?
Yeah, today.
Oh, perfect. Please feel free to email if you got any questions after this webinar, which you don't like to say here in plenary. And I hope that this very short 8 slides or so presentation gives you a bit of a impression and a bit of a inspiration about how to go about it and what potential there lies in digitalizing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye for now.